Right now, at this very second, there is a war being fought over one of the most iconic foods in American history. Not wheat, not beef, not corn, French fries. And here's the thing most Americans have absolutely no idea about. The next time you bite into a McDonald's fry, a Wendy's fry, a Burger King fry, there is a 9 in 10 chance that potato was grown in Canada, processed in Canada, and shipped across the border specifically because American fast food built its entire empire on that supply. 91%. That is the number. 91% of America's frozen French fry imports come from one country, Canada. $2.7 billion every single year. And right now, that supply chain, the one that feeds hundreds of millions of Americans without anyone ever noticing, is being actively destabilized. Not by a drought, not by a crop failure, but by trade policy, by tariffs. And the people who run the fries, the Canadian companies that process them, they're making a quiet, rational decision that could send shockwaves through every fast food chain in this country. They're starting to ask the question no American executive wants them to ask. Why are we still selling to the United States? This is that story.
To understand why this matters, you need to understand just how deeply the American and Canadian potato industries are intertwined. According to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, in the 2023 to 2024 season, Canada exported $3.7 billion worth of total potato products. Of that, $2.7 billion was frozen French fries alone, and of those fries, 91%, $2.4 billion worth, went directly to the United States. But it does not stop at fries. Canada exported $50 million in seed potatoes, 96% went to the U.S., $493 million in fresh potatoes, 93% to the U.S. Every single category, the same pattern. Now here is what most people get wrong. They picture this as two separate industries, Canada on one side, America on the other, competing. That is not what this is. This is one integrated supply chain. Canada specializes in certain potato varieties and processing capacity. The United States focuses on others. Together, they built a system that feeds the fastest, largest, most profitable fast food market on the planet. The U.S. consumed 2.8 million tons of frozen potatoes in 2024 alone, 88% of all North American frozen potato consumption. And the United States has been a net importer of frozen potato products for 5 consecutive years. Import volumes growing, export volumes falling, and 86% of those imports, 86%, come from Canada. This is not a backup relationship. This is load-bearing, and someone just started shaking the foundation.
The Trump administration threatened 25% tariffs on frozen, fresh, and seed potatoes imported from Canada. 25% on an industry that already operates on razor-thin margins, where transportation costs, energy costs, and labor costs eat into every dollar of revenue. A 25% tariff does not just make the product more expensive. For processors running at scale, it could be catastrophic. But here's the thing, and this is critical. The tariff itself is not even the worst part. The worst part is the uncertainty. Think about what it means to run a billion-dollar food processing operation. You need to plan months, sometimes years in advance. You sign contracts with farmers for specific volumes. You staff processing plants. You lock in shipping logistics. You make capital investment decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And now, imagine doing all of that when you do not know if tariffs will be 10% next month, or 25, or 50, when trade policy can shift based on a social media post, when negotiations can collapse overnight. You cannot plan, you cannot invest with confidence, and so you do the only rational thing. You start looking for markets you can count on. The frozen French fry supply chain in North America is not spread across dozens of companies. It is concentrated in 3. McCain Foods, Simplot, Cavendish Farms. These 3 companies operate massive processing facilities across Alberta, Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. And over the last 7 years, they invested hundreds of millions of dollars expanding that capacity. New plants, bigger facilities, more processing volume. Why? Because demand from American quick-service restaurants was surging. McDonald's needed more fries, Wendy's needed more fries, Burger King, Five Guys, Shake Shack, all of them growing, all of them needing reliable, high-volume frozen potato supply. So, Canadian processors built it, specifically for the American market. But that same investment, that same capacity can be pointed somewhere else, and that is exactly what is starting to happen. According to reporting from the Western Producer in April of 2025, potato processors told Canadian farmers they need fewer potatoes for the 2025 season. Contract volumes are being reduced, and the reason? Trade uncertainty with the United States. So where does that supply go? Asia. Japan is already the second largest market for Canadian frozen potatoes. South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines. Demand is growing across the region. Why? Because middle-class populations across Asia are expanding, Western-style fast food is becoming mainstream, and that means demand for frozen French fries that meet quick-service restaurant quality standards. Canadian processors already have relationships with these buyers. They already understand the requirements. What they needed was a reason to prioritize Asian contracts over American ones. Trump gave them that reason. Every time tariffs are threatened, every time the rules change overnight, every time American markets signal instability, Canadian processors pick up the phone and call Tokyo, Seoul, Manila. They discuss increasing volumes. The shift is not dramatic yet. It does not need to be. Even a 5 or 10% reduction in Canadian frozen potato exports to the United States would create serious supply tightness for American fast food chains, because domestic U.S. production cannot simply scale up to fill the gap. Building new processing facilities takes years and hundreds of millions in capital. European imports exist, but shipping frozen potatoes across the Atlantic costs a fraction more than trucking them from Alberta to Montana. There is no easy fix, and the chains are starting to realize it.
McDonald's serves approximately 69 million customers every single day. A substantial portion of those customers order fries. It is, by every measure, the most iconic item on their menu. Wendy's built its entire brand identity around fresh-cut fries, but it still depends on processed potato supply for consistency at scale. Burger King, Five Guys, Shake Shack, Arby's, Culver's, every major chain has built customer expectations around one assumption: that high-quality frozen French fries will always be available at a predictable price. Now imagine Canadian supply to the U.S. drops by 10%. Where do these chains source the difference? Domestic production is already running near capacity, serving existing food service and retail demand. Europe is expensive. There are no other significant suppliers. So what happens? Supply tightens, prices go up, and fast food chains face an impossible choice: absorb higher costs and watch margins shrink, or pass the cost to consumers through menu price increases in an economy where customers are already price sensitive. Higher prices mean lost sales, reduced traffic. Or worse, supply constraints force menu limitations, portion controls, seasonal availability restrictions on the single most ordered item in American fast food. These scenarios sound absurd until you understand the math behind them. But the real crisis, the one that will take longer to arrive but could be far more devastating, is not about frozen fries at all. It is about seed potatoes. Canada exported $50 million in seed potatoes in 2023 to 2024, and 96% of that, $48 million worth, went to the United States. Now, seed potatoes are not optional. You cannot plant a commercial potato crop without certified, disease-free seed stock that is genetically matched to your region and optimized for processing. Canadian seed producers, particularly in Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Alberta, Manitoba, and Quebec, supply the majority of seed that American farmers depend on to grow domestic crops. If tariffs disrupt that seed trade, it does not just reduce imports of finished frozen fries, it threatens the ability of American farmers to plant potatoes at all. And here's why the timing makes it even worse. Planting windows are narrow. They're dictated by climate and growing season. If seed shipments get delayed, even by weeks, farmers miss their window entirely. That means zero production for that entire crop year. This is the delayed fuse in the bomb. Tariffs hit frozen potato imports immediately. Supply to fast food chains tightens now, but simultaneously the same tariff regime disrupts seed potato trade, which quietly reduces American domestic production for the next harvest. The entire supply chain gets hit from both directions, and most people won't even see the second hit coming until it arrives. Now, and this is important, we need to be precise here. Claims of immediate dramatic cuts to Canadian potato exports have been fact-checked, and the data tells a more nuanced story. From January to March 2025, Canada exported 512,621 tons of potatoes to the United States. From April to June, that dropped to 427,467 tons, a drop of roughly 85,000 tons, about 17%. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada spokesperson Stephanie Bly explained that fluctuations in trade occur for various reasons, and that more time is needed to understand the true impact of tariff policy. She also noted that available 2025 data does not yet show an overall increase in shipments to Asian markets. So the full pivot has not happened, but the conditions for that pivot are being actively created. Processors are reducing contract volumes. They're having diversification conversations. They're building Asian relationships. The fact that the shift is not complete does not mean it won't accelerate. It means we're watching the early stages of something much larger.
Here's what keeps procurement executives at every major fast food chain in this country awake at night. This is not a temporary disruption. This is not something they can wait out until the next election cycle. This is the beginning of a structural shift in how Canadian potato processors think about their business. For decades, they could assume American markets were stable, predictable, growing. They invested hundreds of millions of dollars in processing capacity specifically because serving U.S. quick-service restaurants felt like a safe, long-term bet. That assumption is gone. And now Canadian processors are asking themselves a very simple question. Do we really want 70, 80, 90% of our revenue dependent on a market that could face arbitrary tariffs at any moment? The rational answer is no. Diversify, build multi-year contracts with Japanese buyers, expand in South Korea, explore Southeast Asia, reduce exposure to American markets until the chaos cannot threaten business survival. And here's the part that makes this permanent. Once that diversification happens, once processors sign long-term contracts with Asian partners, once they invest in Pacific logistics infrastructure, those changes do not reverse just because a different president takes office. Supply chains are sticky. Business relationships once built persist. The potato trade that Americans took for granted for generations could be fundamentally restructured by the time anyone notices it is gone. This is not an isolated story either. It is part of a pattern. Canadian aluminum producers redirecting supply to European buyers, Canadian mining companies signing critical mineral contracts with Asian partners, Canadian farmers finding new markets for agricultural products that used to flow south. Potatoes are just the latest example, but they are the most visible one. Because when McDonald's faces French fry supply constraints, when Burger King starts adjusting portions, when Wendy's has to raise prices on the item that defines its menu, Americans notice. And they should notice. Because this is what happens when trade relationships are treated as weapons instead of partnerships. When you create enough uncertainty, rational actors on the other side stop depending on you. Canada's not retaliating. Canada's not angry. Canada is simply doing math. The fries still exist. McCain Foods, Simplot, and Cavendish Farms are still running at full capacity in Alberta and Manitoba. Millions of tons of frozen French fries are still being produced every single year. They are just increasingly being shipped to Tokyo and Seoul instead of to McDonald's in Ohio and Burger King in Texas. The supply exists. America is just no longer the guaranteed customer. And that, for an industry that built its entire identity around the assumption that it always would be, is the real crisis.